On the far western edge of Indiana is the George Rogers Clark Memorial. It's been described by many as the most beautiful and majestic federal monument west of Washington, D.C. And rightly so. Located just across the Wabash River from Illinois, it's an awe-inspiring sight from any angle. Inside the monument is a 7.5-foot tall bronze statue of George Rogers Clark. Clark was a natural leader and well over 6 feet tall. People listened to him. By the time he was only 24, he'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel of the Virginia militia. But he is most famous for what he did here at Vincennes, Indiana, at what was British Fort Sackville. He came up with a bold plan to launch a surprise attack against the British. And that bold move changed the course of the nation. On the walls are 7 gigantic murals, each 16 feet wide by 28 feet high. Each depicts Clark's military achievements, including the one that happened here. In February 1779, Clark marched 170 men, 17 days, over 160 miles, through cold, rainy, semi-frozen swampland, taking the British completely by surprise, and capturing Fort Sackville. Some historians say that if it weren't for Clark's bold conquest, it's uncertain if the United States would have won the Revolutionary War, or at least not as soon. George Washington used the news of this victory to gain support from France. The Virginia legislature had ran out of money for this military campaign, so George Rogers Clark, a true patriot, personally financed it by taking out large personal loans. He assumed that Virginia would pay him back later. They didn't. For the rest of his life, he was harassed by creditors. Below the monument is a sculpture of Francis Vigo. Francis was an Italian fur trader that had done very well for himself and aided the American Revolution as a spy, a collaborator that told fellow settlers to side with Clark, and also exchanged Clark's nearly worthless paper money for coin currency that could be used to buy supplies from French settlers. Francis was never compensated for helping finance the Vincennes or Fort Detroit campaigns during his lifetime. However, nearly 40 years after he passed away, the United States government paid for a courthouse bell he'd requested in his will should any money ever come back to his estate. Vigo County is named after him. Nearby the memorial is a visitor center. Inside the visitor center is a small museum and an outstanding movie about George Rogers Clark. It's very well done, not very long, and is highly recommended. Many people believe that George Rogers Clark is buried below the memorial, but he's not. After the Revolutionary War, Clark lived along the Ohio River in a small cabin at present-day Clarksville, Indiana. He operated a mill just below the falls of the Ohio, overlooking Louisville, and where he trained his men on Corn Island. That was until he suffered a massive stroke, fell into a fireplace, and burned his leg so badly that it had to be amputated. He moved in with his sister Lucy and brother-in-law William. It was a farm outside Louisville at what's called Locust Grove. 9 years later, when he died of another stroke in 1818, at only 65 years old, he was buried on the property. However, 51 years later, Clark's body was exhumed and taken to Cave Hill Cemetery. The large round monument to the left of the historical marker is not his grave. General George Rogers Clark, patriot, American hero, and conqueror of the Old Northwest, lies below a row of knee-high gravestones. This humble ending to an American hero just didn't seem right. So in 1928, Indiana citizens started a campaign to build a memorial, and with federal help, raised $2.5 million. Ordered by President Calvin Coolidge, it was to be built at Vincennes, Indiana, where Fort Sackville used to be. The massive structure is 80 feet tall and 90 feet wide. The walls are 2 feet thick. The building is solid granite with 16 Doric columns. The memorial was completed in 1933 and dedicated June 14, 1936, 157 years after Clark's victory. George Rogers Clark's life teaches us many good lessons. Freedom has a very high price, and only the good and noble sacrifice everything for it, not just for themselves, but so generations after them can enjoy it. A quote from George Rogers Clark, inscribed on the memorial floor, says it best. If a country is not worth protecting, it is not worth claiming.